In the shadow of illness, Mehmet was a quiet man in his late 40s, known in his small town for being steady, polite, and reserved. For most of his life, things had been ordinary. His modest government job, his small but warm home, his wife Elif, and their teenage daughter Zeynep. He never asked much from the world, but the world, it seemed, had other plans. It began with fatigue, then a stubborn cough, then fevers that returned like tides. He visited hospitals, endured endless tests, and listened to doctors' careful reassurances. It's nothing contagious, they told him. Rest, take your medicine. So he went home, relieved on the surface, but inside he felt uneasy. Something unseen had followed him back, something he couldn't name. Elif noticed first. She saw the way his hands shook, how his breath came shallow at night. She tried to comfort him, whispering, "We'll get through this. As long as we're together, nothing else." But for weeks, Mehmet sat at her bedside, watching the woman who had been his anchor slip further away. He prayed, he begged, he cursed himself. What if it came from me? What if but H? The day Elif closed her eyes for the last time, Mehmet felt the world split open. At her, Zeynep tried to be strong. She was only 15, still with a child's brightness in her eyes, though grief had made her seem older. She clung to her father as if holding him could stop the darkness from creeping in. But fate, a few months later, the signs appeared in her too, the same fevers, the same shivering hands. Mehmet broke down when he saw it. He shouted into the night, "No, not but." As the illness consumed Zeynep, Mehmet never left her side. On her final night, he held her small hand in his tears wetting the blanket. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Tell M, then HM Eve, if only." The Shadow of Illness. Part 2. The days after Zeynep's funeral blurred together. Mehmet barely remembered the faces of the neighbors who came with food, the quiet condolences whispered at the door, or the imam's words that echoed in the cemetery. All he could remember was the silence at home, the empty chair at the table, Elif's scarf still draped over the arm of the couch, Zeynep's notebooks left open on her desk as if she would return any moment. But she wouldn't. Neither would Elif. The illness remained inside him, quiet but unrelenting. Every cough reminded him of the chain of death he carried. He no longer sought doctors. What could they give him now? He was living proof that whatever had taken them had started with him. Nights were the worst. Sleep brought dreams, Elif's laughter, Zeynep's voice calling Baba. But when he woke, there was only the darkness of an empty house. Sometimes he sat in Zeynep's room, reading the notes she had scribbled in her school books, small dreams written in a teenager's handwriting. "One day I'll go to Istanbul. I want to be a doctor. Maybe I'll travel abroad." Each line pierced him. She wanted to heal others, and I was the one who gave her the sickness. Mehmet began walking at night. The town was asleep, the streets dimly lit, and he wandered aimlessly, like a ghost haunting his own life. Some nights he reached the cemetery, standing between two graves, his wife's and his daughter's, whispering into the cold air, "I should be there. I should be under this soil, not you." Yet, despite his prayers for death, life clung to him stubbornly. The illness weakened him, but it did not finish him. He began to wonder if this was its true cruelty, not killing him, but forcing him to live with the unbearable weight of loss. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed. Mehmet became a shadow in his own neighborhood. the man whose house no longer echoed with laughter. People avoided speaking of Elif and Zeynep in front of him, as if silence could protect him. But silence was his enemy. It screamed louder than words. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table, Mehmet opened a worn family photo album. There they were, Elif smiling shyly at their wedding, Zeynep as a toddler covered in cake at her birthday, the three of them by the seaside on their first and only vacation. He touched the photographs as though the paper could breathe again. His chest tightened, and then, for the first time, an idea came. Dangerous, desperate, but clear. If death would not come for him, he would go to it. Mehmet sat with the photo album open before him, the lamplight casting a pale glow over the smiling faces of his wife and daughter. His fingers trembled as they traced over their images. The room was silent, except for the faint wheeze in his own chest. He thought of ending it. The thought was no longer a whisper, but a steady drumbeat in his mind. Why wait? Why let this illness drag me further into misery? They are gone. I should be with them. That night, he walked to the cemetery again. The moon hung low, and the air was sharp with winter. He stood between the two graves, staring down at the soil that covered his family. He knelt, pressing both palms into the cold earth. Elif, Zeynep, I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I gave you this curse. I should have gone first. I should have... The words dissolved into sobs. For the first time since Zeynep's death, he allowed himself to cry, deep, wrenching cries that left him gasping. As dawn approached, Mehmet remained at the graves, numb and exhausted. He had decided he would not fight the illness anymore. No more medicines, no more food than necessary. He would let it take him, slowly or swiftly. It didn't matter. But fate, again, was not so simple. Weeks later, when his strength was nearly gone, there came a knock at his door. It startled him. Few people visited now. Reluctantly, he opened it to find a young doctor, one he vaguely recognized from the town hospital. Mr. Mehmet, the doctor said gently, I'm sorry to intrude. I need to speak with you. Mehmet frowned. About what? The doctor hesitated, then continued, We've been reviewing cases like yours. There's something you should know. The illness that took your wife and daughter, it might not have come from you. Mehmet froze. The words struck like thunder. What do you mean? We recently identified a bacterial strain in the water supply near your street. Several families fell ill. It's possible your household was exposed. You weren't the cause. Mehmet staggered back, gripping the doorframe. His heart pounded. Not me. Not from me. The weight he had carried for so long cracked, but instead of relief, a wave of anguish swept over him. If he wasn't the cause, then he had lived months drowning in guilt that wasn't his to bear. He had hated himself, cursed himself, prayed for death, all under a shadow built of misunderstanding. And yet, Elif and Zeynep were still gone. Mehmet closed his eyes. Why tell me this now? He whispered. The young doctor's voice softened. Because you're still alive, and you deserve to know the truth. That night, Mehmet returned to the photo album. His hands still shook, but the voices in his head were different. The guilt had loosened its grip, leaving only grief. It was unbearable still, but it was no longer poisoned by the thought that he had killed them. For the first time, a question rose in him, not about dying, but about living. Could I carry their memory forward instead of following them into the grave? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But as he sat in the silence, he whispered to the pictures before him, Elif, Zeynep, Forgive me for wanting to leave. Maybe I can try. Maybe I can keep you alive here. He touched his chest. As long as I breathe. The doctor's words echoed in Mehmet's mind for days. You weren't the cause. He repeated them again and again, as though they were a prayer, a lifeline cast into the storm of his grief. Every night he still walked to the cemetery. But now, when he stood before the graves, he no longer whispered apologies. Instead, he spoke to them of memories, how Zeynep had once begged for ice cream in the middle of winter, how Elif would hum while cooking, how their small apartment had always felt like the warmest place in the world. One evening, he brought with him a notebook. He sat cross-legged between the graves and began to write. Not about his illness, not about death, but about them. Page after page, he wrote their laughter, their kindness, their dreams. The notebook became a book, the book became many, and soon his tiny home was filled with pages covered in their names. Months turned into a year. Mehmet's health, though fragile, steadied. He began volunteering at the local school, helping children with their studies, often slipping stories of Zeynep into his lessons, how curious she had been, how she once dreamed of becoming a doctor. The children listened with bright eyes, as though they had known her too. And so, piece by piece, Mehmet built something he thought impossible, a legacy of love, not of illness. He carried Elif's gentleness in his voice, Zeynep's hope in his teaching. He could not bring them back, but he could keep them alive in others. On the second anniversary of their passing, Mehmet stood once more at their graves, the rising sun painting the horizon in gold. He placed the finished book he had written, a memoir of his family, between the two headstones. With tears glistening in his eyes, he whispered, "You are not gone. As long as I live, you will live too, and when my time comes, we'll meet again, not in sorrow, but in peace." The morning breeze stirred, carrying his words into the air. For the first time since their deaths, Mehmet felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Not despair, not guilt, hope. And with that, he turned back toward the town, not to wait for death, but to live the life that would honor the ones he loved most.